Here we are in Hebrews chapter 11, picking up the story as the author of Hebrews tells it on the faith of Abraham as a description and an example to us. There are two kinds of people, people that enjoy camping and everybody else that knows the decade and the time that they live in and would rather live indoors because we've come this far. How many of you guys are campers, like actual campers? I want to rough it in a tent kind of camping for an extended period of time. I am not cut out for that. I do enjoy it, but even if you are somebody that enjoys that sort of activity, God help you, it's acceptable, it's enjoyable, it's something you might look forward to, but only up to a certain point, right? It's good until it isn't. You probably might like it, but if you're just out in the wilderness and there's only a little piece of canvas between you and a bear, I bet you don't like camping as much in that version of events when you're not protected and sheltered and have security that maybe a house might afford you. So this is an interesting thing that we're given this morning in Abraham's faith. We value things like security, provision, familiarity. The idea of permanence itself is at the root of our seeking most of the time. Like we want to enjoy the comforts of life, the securities of life, and we do this all to avoid discomfort and lack of security. If I had more time, I'd probably explore this a little more, but I would say this is actually at the foundation of most of our legalism. Meaning, we want to look at obedience this morning, and obedience is described in the author of Hebrews and in the life of Abraham as somebody who went out. It's not described as Abraham consistently obeyed the rules. In fact, it just says obeyed means he went out. He laid down his life and he went on faith to a place that he did not know anything about. Most of the biblical record of faith, all of the apostolic testimony, Fox's Book of Martyrs, all of the historic missions, biographies. In fact, most of the church history is given to us, and it looks a lot less like the way we try to live and a lot more like what Christ said, which is that this world is going to give us tribulation and trial, and we're supposed to lay down our lives to pour ourselves out and for the good of the kingdom. All Christian allegories that have been written that are worth their salt in Christian fiction usually lay out our lives as this kind of journey. And it's this temporary dwelling that we have here on earth that looking forward to a better destination. And in the midst of that, we need to have this sort of cross-shaped, sacrificial, not my will, but yours. That sounds familiar. Be done. Not my kingdom, but yours, God. As it is heaven, bring it to earth. Not my treasures and my comforts, but the things that in heaven, that's where I want to store up what I do now. I think often when we think of obedience, we think 95% of the time about things that are good and bad, right and wrong. But nobody in the record of Hebrews that is an example of faith is commended for their rule-following obedience. And yet when I say the word obedience, that's probably the first thing you think of. How many things can I check off my to-do list that I did that and God will be pleased with that? Now, that doesn't mean we just ignore that, but we should live in a certain way. But obedience in life is really the perspective that I want to focus us on this morning. Obedience with life, maybe we could say it that way. There's only one main verb here that we're given in verse 11, that is Abraham obeyed by faith. We prefer commands because they're easier to deal with. We prefer commands because they say, do this and don't do that. And it simplifies our measurements of valuations. I can understand, I can wrap my arms around that. I can have the parameters there. I know the outcome of that. But this says, have faith, keep trusting when you don't have any guarantees about the parameters. That's what obedience looks like. So Abel, Enoch, Noah, Abraham now, and his family all represent a certain group of people. They all exist pre-law, pre-Sinai, pre-Mosaic covenant, pre all the things that we think of as good and bad, right and wrong, and they exist and have faith and obedience that comes before all of that. Because worship of God is about trusting him with your life disposition. So how do you obey without laws? Well, in Abraham's case, obedience looked like the obedience of faith, of trusting what God said about a place he doesn't know, to leave his life behind and to venture out into the world. There it is. He obeyed And then we want to know what obeyed is. Well, he went out. And he was when he was called to go out, and then he went out. So there are three things in operation. By faith, Abraham obeyed. He left behind everything that we would qualify as security and life and pleasure and comfort and all the things that we define our existence as. What makes our lives worthwhile. That's everything that Abraham left behind in his old world. And then he lived in tents, we're told. As he went into the land of the promise, he lived in tents. It speaks of something to his transient nature. He held loosely to the things that he was given. Last, we see that he was looking forward. He did all this by a certain disposition in his heart that didn't look at necessarily the horizontal surroundings, but he looked even through those and beyond and upward beyond those to a better country, one that has a foundation in heaven. With that as our thesis of the morning. Obedience looks like a life laid down in faith, much like we see in the biblical testimony and in the martyrs and in the missions work. And it requires these three evidences. So let's pray for the rest of our time in the Word. We'll ask God to help us unpack these treasures. Father and God, we don't come to your word flippantly or lightly to search it as though in itself it held life, but in the way that it directs our eyes and our souls towards Christ in faith. God, would you do that this morning? Would you speak by your Spirit through your word that you have breathed for our good? God, I ask this morning that you would open our eyes to the glory and the beauty of a city that we have yet to behold. God, open our ears that you would hear your voice, that we would hear your voice calling us from the places where we kind of sit and reside and where we dwell in complacency and apathy. But God, call us to move forward this morning. And God, give us the hearts that are obedient. Loosen our grip on this world so that we might follow you in greater faith. We ask this in Christ's name. Amen. By faith, Abraham obeyed, we're told. When he was called to go out. That calling to go out is specific to Abraham, but it kind of exists in our world too. There's an expectation, if your name is called, that you ought to answer to that. I think it would probably help us a little bit, if you're not familiar, just with the Old Testament biblical record, to orient ourselves in who Abraham is and like when he comes onto the scene. He's skipped over a little bit since the last verse where we were with Noah. And Noah obviously uses his life. He pours his life out to build this ark, and he preserves his household. And then we fast forward a few chapters in Genesis, and we get to the Tower of Babel, where the people on earth decide to ascend to heaven. They build a great city and a great tower, and God confuses their languages and spreads out people. And just after that, we are introduced to Abraham in this line. Abraham was from a place called Ur of the Chaldees. Ur is a cosmopolitan place. It's a nice city. It's, in fact, pretty advanced for the time in a lot of the ways that we wouldn't think about. Abraham is called when Abraham is nothing. He's a no one. He's literally a nobody, and God reminds him of this later. I didn't choose you because you were special. I chose you because I set my love on you. I just simply chose you, Abraham, to give you a hope and a future. So he's called out of this pagan place. The place that he's called out of is famous for worshiping the moon god of sin. Well, it's kind of an ironic little cognate there, but sin, and they are famous for giving fertility, which Abraham has no heirs at the point when he's called. In Acts chapter 7, Stephen, who is actually the first martyr of the church, he's giving a speech to his fellow Jews and Israelites. And as he's recounting this history, he says that the God of glory appeared to Abraham when he was in Mesopotamia. Before he's ever moved out of where we find him when he actually receives the explicit call in Genesis. So we kind of move back to see that God actually calls him out, and he moves in obedience. And the emphasis here when it says that he was called to go out and that he did that thing is like this coexisting call with obedience. Meaning, as the call existed, that's when he responded, almost as though there's an immediacy. But if you're familiar with the story, Abraham's story is not one of immediacy. He kind of lags a little bit. He moves halfway out. He's told to leave his land. He's told to leave his household. And he's told to leave his people. Those are all the things that we look at for security. All the things that define our world. I have a place that I exist, that I'm familiar with. I know how to make commerce. I know how to move up in the world. I have a title. I have respect. I have a people that I'm responsible for. I have a household that exists. We own land in this place. A familiar people in which you would not be a stranger. You wouldn't be considered an outsider. You'd be a citizen of the city. You'd be afforded rights that maybe other people aren't afforded. You know the language. These are the things that we call life. So as he goes out, we're told that he leaves his land, his people, his house, and if you want to just put that in parentheses, life security. And he does that because he leaves all of those things behind. Abraham at this point is of age, if you will. He's not a young man full of hopes and dreams and an idea that he's just going to go out there and rule the world. He's like 75 years old at this point. He has no heir. His wife hasn't provided him with an heir. That would seem to be kind of sort of ironic that he worships this pagan god that's supposed to provide fertility, and yet he has no heir. But he's from some sort of wealth, and so he moves out of Ur to about maybe 400 or 500 miles away, and he lives there with his father-in-law. You probably don't grasp that when God calls Abraham, he doesn't call him from a place of like backwoods, know nothing, to a better and greater, more cosmopolitan place. He's called out of the thing that we all do when we go camping. Ur even had indoor plumbing. Recent excavations have found they had indoor plumbing. They had a complex system of drains. They drained the sewage out. It was a way of piping in good water. That's what Abraham left behind, which makes his obedience all the more perplexing. It's an example to us because he had to forsake all of that and leave it to follow God's call. But he doesn't just do it because a voice out of heaven boomed. Remember, Stephen says the God of glory appeared to him. In some way or shape or form, Abraham knew God in enough of a way that he trusted what was spoken. Abraham, go to the place where I will show you. It says that he went out actually not knowing. That word there means that he didn't have any perception about what kind of land it was going to be. He just actually told him to leave. He didn't say, and go to this place. He just said, to the place I will show you. So essentially he said, depart, without a destination in mind. Now, if you were told to depart, I think that would be the first question, and go where? God, if you want me to leave point A, tell me what point B is. And the emphasis here is on the fact that he didn't know what point B would be like. It wasn't that he was promised something necessarily better. He was just told to leave everything behind. When he's called, he responded. The challenge for us is to do this just out of pure obedience. Just out of pure obedience. Not because the thing that's set out seems like it's actually a better deal than the one we're currently in. Like, how often do you know the right thing to do is to just trust God in the next step, but you qualify that with, well, God, give me the wisdom so that I know before I take this step of faith that you're going to assure me good things. It's not there for Abraham. That's not faith, in fact. God doesn't owe you a roadmap. And I think often we would say, I don't have a problem obeying God, just tell me where to go. And God's persisting call is trust. Not go to this specific place, but trust. Trust me. Trust that when I say it's better here, leave this place, you'll go and you'll leave it behind. So I think often our objection is God hasn't called me to do that because he hasn't provided the roadmap and he didn't give me the destination and he hasn't bought me the ticket. And he does none of those things for Abraham. He just says, go. So I said, if you're familiar a little bit with his story, you kind of know that he drags his feet a little bit because when he's told to go, he kind of goes, but he goes in a way that's like a half-hearted obedience. He goes because his father moved him out. He lives in his father's house in a place called Haran. And he lives there until the death of his father. And what Hebrews is highlighting is a call that it might be momentary, but it's not complete. But it's definitive. but it's not perfect. As in, the moment of overcoming inertia is so important because it starts the journey. Even though we might look at, in this moment, a half-hearted kind of obedience, it's that he obeyed and went out, and that began the journey that would eventually continue. We've been told that in Hebrews already. That good, right, true, genuine faith will persist. That's how you know what good, right, true, and genuine faith is. It will persist. That's how we know that we've come to know Christ, because our faith perseveres. But sometimes we have halfway obedience, and we have some convenient excuses. And I think in Abraham's life, we can see some of our own kind of objections. Sometimes we do something that we want to do because it happens to be aligned with God's will. Like, it was really already convenient for you to go ahead and do that thing anyway. Like, if Abraham's father had already decided to move out of Ur, and it just happened to be aligned with something he was going to do anyway. And so we get to kind of give ourselves a little pat on the back that we obeyed God, but we did it because it was already aligned with something that was already happening. And that's not really your faith. Sometimes God uses those kind of circumstances and situations to help us, right? To get us moving, because maybe we would just aren't going to get it going on our own. But I think we should be genuine in our examination. Are you complacent in places where you're obedient, but you only did it because it was already appealing to you? The other thing is that sometimes we do something because you have other securities that are more appealing besides God. If you get to heaven and you had everything that you desired right here on earth, perfect health, complete joy and happiness, but Jesus wasn't there, would you be okay with that? And that's the point. It's like, if I could just have this thing, then I'd be happy. And God's saying, you'll never be happy without me. Like, our complacency says, well, I will be happy if I could just get this other security in my life. If I just had an heir, if I just had a house, if I just had a job, if I just had whatever it is, everything besides God. And so sometimes the perspective, the prospect of securing this thing is more appealing to us than knowing that we're with God himself. God calls Abraham because God's going to show Abraham a place. So there's not a question of like, I'll stay here, Abraham, while you go, and I'll just watch you from behind. I mean, he tells him he's going to show him a place. So there implied is that I'll be with you. So Abraham went out. He forsakes all of life. He leaves it behind him, and he moves forward. Moves forward. By faith, he went to live in the land of promise, as in a foreign land, living in tents with Isaac and Jacob, heirs with him of the same promise. This is an interesting way of wording it, because it says he went to live. It uses this verb of rest with a verb of motion. And it kind of mushes them both together. It says he goes into rest, meaning he's not going to kind of dig foundations wherever he's at. He goes in for the purpose of temporarily dwelling wherever he finds. And this is embodied in the mentality that he just decides to live in tents. No matter what, I'm going to be a tent dweller. I'm going to be a camper for life. If I could say it this way, he just adopts a pilgrim mentality. A pilgrim mentality, not a pioneer. Pioneers go, and they go and they kind of find a place to rest, and they stay there, and they begin to adopt and build a life there. But Abraham says, I'm going to go there, and I'm going to live always in a tent. It's not poverty for the sake of poverty. It's not asceticism as though I will not partake of anything in the world. It's intentional impermanence. It's decided to say, I will not set down my roots here because this is not most important. He adopts this mentality of what we're told is a stranger, a foreigner in a foreign land. He never acquires the things that are promised. I think this is how we think of our lives, though. We kind of grow in stages, right? We're kids, and then once we mature into something, we say, well, I've got to build a life for myself, and usually that includes a set of steps that we can lay down foundations for something to build on, some securities that make sense so that after that, we will begin to kind of build our ministry, I guess, after that. Like, God comes second most times. But Abraham's faith was marked literally by two powerful emblems, one of them being the tent. But every time the tent shows up in Abraham's story, it's closely followed by an altar. In Genesis chapter 12, Abraham is going out and says, from there he moved to the hill country on the east of Bethel, and he pitched his tent with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. And there he built an altar to the Lord, and he called upon the name of the Lord. Later in Genesis chapter 13, it says, so Abraham moved his tent, and he came and he settled by the oaks of Mamre, which are at Hebron. And there he built an altar to the Lord. Tent, altar, tent, altar. Many commentators have noted that these are in a particular order for a particular reason. Abraham's life goes tent, altar, and the order is crucial. Because the reality that I'm only here temporarily has to come before true sacrifice. The identity that I hold loosely to everything here has to loosen our grip so that we can have open hands. The idea of establishing something or founding something, that's like a pioneer mentality. They're important words. They're legacy words. They're all the things that Abraham left behind. He left his house. He left his land. He left his people. So Abraham is now a pilgrim. And every place that he goes and he sets his tent is a confession. My life here is not built on the foundations of building a house here. It's built on the more permanent structure of an altar. I think we tend to presume that the extravagance of our worship will increase our detachment to the world. Like I'm preoccupied with things in the world that grab my attention, that I seek for security, and that if I could just outweigh that in some way, if my experience of God could be greater or my worship more sacrificial, then my detachment from the world will happen. But Abraham testifies to us that it's the exact opposite. Why? Because God cannot fill hands that are grasp and clasping something that are here and temporal. He can only fill hands that are open and have already released the things of this world. So your offering is hard to make in genuine nature while you're clinging to the world. So he lets go of that first. He sets the tent up first. The temporary structure as the testimony. This is who I am. I'm a pilgrim here. I'm a sojourner. Yes, God, you might give me good things, but these are blessings to enjoy, but not things to live by. Once he's reckoned that, then the altar comes. This actually becomes an important idea later on, because as Abraham is following this protocol and he's living his life, he's living this pilgrim life, he doesn't do it perfectly. Shock. In fact, he has a pretty significant lapse of faith, and he ventures down into Egypt and he forsakes his wife in such a unique way that I don't know how they got through counseling. But when he comes back, he returns from Egypt. In chapter 13, it says, and he journeyed on from Negeb as far as Bethel to the place where his tent had been at the beginning. The place that he first set up his tent, between Bethel and Ai. And then he says, to the place where he had made an altar at the first. Like when Abraham gets back from his failure, he goes right back to the place where he started, and guess what still is standing there? Not his tent, the altar. The permanent structure, the thing that he built with stones, the thing that was meant to last. That's why it's important that you recognize if you build the tent structure first, it becomes the altar. You're worshiping at that. You want that thing to last. You want that thing to provide you security. You want that thing, and it truly is acting as your God in that moment. If we prioritize the temporal and elevate it to permanence, we begin to invest in it and treat it as our means of security. Abraham exemplifies that that's not true, that true, genuine worship will always exist as the permanent structure, and that is the thing that we should trust in, invest in. Worship is the priority. It's not incidental. Like it doesn't just happen. It has to be a chosen thing. It has to be prioritized in our life. Abraham doesn't move into the neighborhood and just start attending the local church. We get the benefit of that a lot of times. Like you get to partake here in a thing that's already rolling. Every place that Abraham steps his foot is a brand new opportunity to lay a new altar. To lay worship as a foundation, and we should look at our proverbial lives the same way. I don't need you to go build a church, but no matter where in your life is new territory, a place that you've stepped your foot, worship should be your first priority. How is this going to serve God? How will I be able to return back to this? And what can I do about my life, my tent, that can facilitate that? Like, how can I acknowledge that that's not my priority and really pour myself into laying the foundation of worship to God, of surrender to God? Because that's the only permanent foundation you can actually lay. That's the only foundation you can build on. That's what Paul says. In Pilgrim's Progress, which is this great allegory written by John Bunyan, he's a Puritan. The main character's name is Christian. And he has a companion in the beginning, and his companion's name is Faithful. And as they're going on their journey to what's called the celestial city, you can see how the allegory plays out here. Christian on his way to the celestial city, journeying along the way, and they come to a town called Vanity Fair. And Vanity Fair is full of townspeople who want to sell the world's goods and treasures and experiences to this pair. And because they refuse these, Christian and Faithful, they're taken captive and they're put on trial, and Faithful is martyred. And Christian escapes. Because the world wants you to be caught up in the world's stuff, to treat it as permanent, to give your life over to the world. After Faithful is executed and Christian continues on his way, his new companion is Hopeful. Sort of the idea here is that once he loses that and once he moves beyond the treasures of this world, all he has left truly as his encouragement is the hope of forward. Does that make sense? Once you've left behind the world, once you've loosened your grasp on what's here and stopped trying to make it permanent, then your companion in the world is hope. And we have to embrace the mentality of what's mine and start embracing what's ours. It says that Abraham lived as a tent dweller with his son and his grandson. He's got 2 generations of faith, if you will, within his household. In Genesis 18, there's a fabulous testimony by God. Before he destroys Sodom, he says this about Abraham. He says, "For I have known him." Really, the word there is, I've chosen him. But he says, "I've done this so that he may command his children and his household after him. They may keep the way of the Lord." Abraham's life is about Abraham's life, but it's also about perpetuating the truth and the promise of God to the next generation. Your life is a testimony more than it is just unique to you. It's not totally introspective. We are outwardly focused. In fact, the beginning of the promise, when God comes to Abraham and he says, "I'll bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you," he says, "So that," it's followed closely by us, "so that." Here's the reason I'm going to do this, so that all the nations of the earth will be blessed through you. I'm going to do this so that. It's bigger than you. And we have to remember that it's not just so focused on us. There are fellow heirs that we can affect. He has a son and a grandson, and they too inherit this lifestyle. They too are tent dwellers. We're told in just a few verses that they never actually possess the thing that God promised them. They don't actually come into permanent security possession of it, only a forward-looking possession of it. It says, "For he was looking forward to the city that has foundations, whose designer and builder is God." Hope is forward-looking. Hope is something that's not right here, right now. It's how we're meant to continue forward, by looking forward. The fixation of your attention, where is it? Like when there's nothing occupying your mentality, when you're not specifically fixated on a study of Scripture, what is it that you are looking forward to? It uses it sort of in an ambiguous I'm not even going to try that, in an adage kind of way. We know what it means to look forward to something in the sense of anticipation, but it also means like literally to look intensely. Every place that Abraham went was new. It's a new experience. He's like taking in the land of Canaan, and it's the land of the promise. We'll get to that later. But there's many episodes of looking that are specifically highlighted in the Genesis account of Abraham's journeying in the promised land. Besides his half-hearted, halfway under his father's obedience at the beginning, he also takes with him his nephew Lot. There's a problem with having a Lot in your life. A Lot ends up being a thorn in Abraham's side more often than he's not. And there's a contrast that's given to us all throughout the book of Genesis in what Abraham looks at and what Lot looks at. What is Lot's attention on and what is Abraham's attention on? And what is the result of said attention? Lot, we're told, is enticed by the well-watered plains towards Sodom. Because God had blessed them and their sheep and their herds, and there's so many people in their tribe that the two can't get along anymore, Abraham and Lot. And so they decide to part ways. And so Abraham defers to Lot, and he says, you can have first choice where to go. And so Lot, it says, looks around. He looks and he sees the well-watered plains. And we're told, begins to pitch his tent towards Sodom. Sodom is eventually sacked by a group of kings, and it says all of the goods of Sodom and the people there are taken captive. And this actually becomes a problem for Abraham. Abraham's the one that goes and he has to go and rescue Lot, and he does that. And they bring back all the goods and the inhabitants. But if you kind of read between the lines there, it's that he begins pitching his tent towards Sodom and then eventually becomes recognized as one who belongs to Sodom. And he's rescued back. And then a little bit later, we find out that Lot is now sitting at the gates of Sodom. He's one who's considered an elder of the city. He's a respected leader of Sodom. So as he began to be enticed by the things that were just horizontal, if you will, he goes closer and closer to the place where he barely and then eventually narrowly escapes destruction. So Lot at the entrance of Sodom is a contrast to Abraham, who's found at the entrance of his tent. Abraham's attention is consistently looking forward and upward. Forward and upward. When God tells Abraham, I'm going to reiterate my promise to you. I want to remind you what you're here for. And he tells him to look up to the heavens and see if he can number the stars. And he tells him to look to the north, the south, the east, the west, and that he could see all of this land I will give to you. Abraham's gaze is heavenly and upward, not temporal and horizontal. He's looking forward, not to the things that actually are there right now, but to the things that have a foundation. That's such an interesting choice of a word, because he lives in a way that has no temporal foundation, looking forward to a place that actually has a true foundation, a city which God is the architect himself of. How do you pack for a missions trip? Or how do you pack for a camping trip? Or how do you pack for a vacation? I mean, the mentality about what kind of journey you're on kind of dictates the way that you'll put your provisions together. So Abraham's provisions go something like this. I need a place to temporarily dwell, and if God's with me, everything else will work itself out. We're journeying towards God. Where are we going to end up? I don't know. He's going to show us the place. That's what faith looks like. It's looking forward beyond what's here to the thing that God has promised. Traveling towards a destination is not so important as the proverbial adage, it's about the traveling. It's about the holding loosely. It's about the mentality of being a traveler. Hold loosely, enjoy, but don't detach. God's destination is, if you will, faith. Jesus speaks of Abraham in this way. He says, Abraham rejoiced that he would see my day. He saw it and he was glad. Somehow with the eyes of faith, Abraham's able to perceive the day of Christ and what he would bring in setting up a foundation that does last. Abraham rejoiced in that reality, not in what he did not have in this time. not in the things that he did not get to experience, not in the securities that he was not afforded. We should be reminded that the whole reason why chapter 11 exists in Hebrews is because chapter 10, he reminds this hurting, persecuted church, listen, I know it's difficult. You're going to experience times of trial, and you've already experienced the plundering of your property, and you did it with joy because you know that you had a lasting possession. But he says, persevere. Don't shrink back, because if you do, God has no pleasure in that. So faith perseveres. And then he begins to go down the list of how faith has persevered through all of the circumstances and all of the trials and all of the things that we can experience in a possible life. And that's why all of these examples are not meant to give you the roadmap to control your life, but to give you the description and the example and the encouragement to say, faith will get you through this. So that when you ask yourself, does my life look like this? You can answer wholeheartedly with looking at the comparison. Maybe your life doesn't look like Abraham's life because you are grasping at security in temporal things. Maybe you're only going so far as to be obedient in places where it's convenient and already aligned with your goals. Maybe you have an excuse that God hasn't already secured for me a fantabulous benefits package at the end of this journey, and therefore I think it would be unwise to trust him. But even if you take it out of those realms, like you're not supposed to just move. This isn't an excuse to be flippantly unreliable and just flaky and moving all the time. What it does say is that obedient faith responds always to God's call. Even when it costs something. Even when he's actually just calling you to leave that besetting sin that you trust in as your security and your pleasure more than you believe that God will give you those things. That's the insidious thing. We trust in these things. I often ask the same question to the guys I meet with. And I ask them this, where is faith not existing in your walk right now? Like, why aren't you able to do this thing? Why do you fail here? And the answer is because I don't believe that God is better than this thing I'm choosing. I don't believe that obedience will actually result in my good and his glory. Abraham's going out is faithful obedience because it definitively severs me and mine and all of my securities and all of my hopes, and it places them all in God. Abraham's trust was not in a land. He had not seen it. He never owned it. Abraham didn't trust in a family. He had none. And his nephew and him had parted ways. Abraham didn't trust in idols. He left all of those behind. Abraham didn't trust in wealth or possession. He became a stranger and a foreigner. Abraham didn't trust in his spouse. She had provided no heir. Abraham believed God, and it was counted to him as righteousness. So, what do we need? Well, it says in verse 13, a couple verses down, that they died in faith. That's the end goal of the journey. It's not that you're supposed to get to a specific spot and stop. It's that you persevere to the end of this life. They died in faith, not having received the things promised, but having seen them and greeted them from afar, and having acknowledged that they were strangers and exiles on the earth. So we're meant to say, faith can do this. You can try to do it. You can try to just be a person that denies themselves pleasures in this world, but that's not the same thing as saying, listen, I'm just a stranger passing through. This is not my home. I hold loosely to the things that I have. You know what my priority is building worship altars every place that I go. In any place that God calls me, I just want to be obedient. I want to pour my life out for that. And that can coexist with responsibility. It's not one at the negation of the other, it's both and. But it only comes by faith, and it only comes by adopting this mentality. So listen, I do this not to heap discouragement, but to give you encouragement. Because the whole hall of witnesses that we have here are meant to encourage us to look towards Christ, who is the author and the perfecter of our faith. So don't hyper-focus. Don't navel gaze and be like, oh, I'm not enough. Just use the comparison of Abraham's life to your life. I think it's actually really good for us that he's a half-hearted obedience at the beginning. And he has so many disruptions and failures, and we gotta kind of get down into the nitty-gritty of his life, and we're like, how is this guy the example of faith? Why? Because he died in faith. Because the moment of inertia was overcome and it continued and it persevered. By definition, all genuine faith perseveres. It will make it to the end. Go back to faith. Faith is not instantaneously perfective, but listen, it's instantaneously definitive. There is a point at which you've crossed over, if you want to call it the watershed moment, the continental divide, if you will. Once you're in faith, it's going to perpetuate to the end. It will get to the destination, but we stumble forward. We stumble forward, trusting and hoping. Our Father, I pray that this word would come to our hearts and do the work of cutting away the hard things that calcify around our hearts, that make us indifferent to your voice calling us to obedience. God, whether that's in complacency and sin, apathy and half-hearted obedience, if it's just treasuring the things of this world more than we trust in you. God, I just pray that it would be your word that does a work in our hearts, that you would scoop us up, pick us up, dust us off, put us back on the journey, that we would journey with hope,